Welcome back to our channel, everyone. Today we're diving into one of the most chilling mysteries in New Jersey, the infamous Watcher House in Westfield. This seemingly ordinary home has become the center of a real-life thriller that has left its mark on the neighborhood and sparked countless rumors. What makes this house so special? In 2014, a married couple bought what was supposed to be their dream home at 657 Boulevard in the idyllic suburb of Westfield, New Jersey. Derek and Maria Broaddus bought the stunning 6-bedroom Dutch colonial home for $1.3 million with plans of renovating it for their family. But no one could have guessed what would happen once they completed their purchase. One night in June 2014, 3 days after Derek and Maria closed on the 6-bedroom house at 657 Boulevard, Derek Broaddus, who wanted to do some renovations to the home before the family moved in, had just finished an evening of painting and went outside to check the mail. There wasn't much in the mail except a few bills and a white card-shaped envelope. It was addressed in thick, clunky handwriting to the new owner, and the typed note inside began warmly. "Dearest new neighbor at 657 Boulevard, allow me to welcome you to the neighborhood." For the Broaddus, being able to buy a home as big and beautiful as 657 Boulevard was a dream come true. Maria was raised in Westfield, and their new mansion was a few blocks from her childhood home. Derek grew up working class in Maine, then moved his way up the ladder at an insurance company in Manhattan and became a senior vice president, which allowed them to get their wish a few days after celebrating Derek's 40th birthday. They hadn't moved in, but their 3 kids were already debating which of the house's fireplaces Santa Claus would use. But as Derek kept reading the letter from his new neighbor, it took an unexpected and dark turn. "How did you end up here?" the writer asked. "Did 657 Boulevard call to you with its force within?" The letter went on. 657 Boulevard has been the subject of my family for decades now, and as it approaches its 110th birthday, I have been put in charge of watching and waiting for its second coming. My grandfather watched the house in the 1920s and my father watched in the 1960s. It is now my time. Do you know the history of the house? Do you know what lies within the walls of 657 Boulevard? Why are you here? I will find out. The author wanted to make sure they all knew he had already been watching. The letter mentioned the workers renovating the home. "I see already that you have flooded 657 Boulevard with contractors so that you can destroy the house as it was supposed to be," the person wrote. "Tisk, tisk, tisk, bad move. You don't want to make 657 Boulevard unhappy." Earlier in the week, Derek and Maria had gone to the house and chatted with their new neighbors while their children, who were 5, 8, and 10 years old, ran around the backyard with several kids from the neighborhood. The writer seemed to have noticed. "You have children. I have seen them. So far, I think there are 3 that I have counted," the anonymous correspondent wrote, before asking if there were more on the way. "Do you need to fill the house with the young blood I requested? Better for me. Was your old house too small for the growing family? Or was it greed to bring me your children? Once I know their names, I will call to them and draw them to me." The envelope had no return address. "Who am I?" the person wrote. "There are hundreds and hundreds of cars that drive by 657 Boulevard each day. Maybe I'm in one. Look out any of the many windows in 657 Boulevard at all the people who stroll by each day. Maybe I am one." The letter concluded with the suggestion that this message would not be the last. "Welcome, my friends, welcome. Let the party begin," followed by a signature typed in a cursive font, "The Watcher." It was already past 10 p.m., and Derek Broaddus was alone. He ran into the house and began turning off every light in the home so no one could see inside, then called the Westfield Police Department. An officer came to the house, read the letter, and said, "What the fuck is this?" He asked Derek if he had enemies and recommended moving a piece of construction equipment from the back porch in case the Watcher tried to toss it through a window. Derek rushed back to his wife and kids, who were living at their old home elsewhere in Westfield. That night, Derek and Maria wrote an email to the previous owners of the house, the Woods. John and Andrea Woods sold them 657 Boulevard. In the email, they asked if they had any idea who the Watcher might be, or why he or she had mentioned them by name when writing, "I asked the Woods to bring me young blood, and it looks like they listened." The next morning, Andrea Woods responded, A few days before moving out, the Woods had also received a letter from the Watcher. The note had been odd, she said, and made similar mention of the Watcher's family observing the house over time. But Andrea said she and her husband had never received anything like it in their 23 years in the house and had thrown the letter away without much thought. That day, the Woods went with Maria to the police station, where Detective Leonard Lugo told her not to tell anyone about the letters, including her new neighbors, most of whom she had never met, and all of whom were now suspects. The Broadus spent the coming weeks on high alert. Derek canceled a work trip, and whenever Maria took the kids to their new house, she would yell their names if they wandered into a corner of the yard. When Derek gave a tour of the renovation to a couple on the block, he froze when the wife said, "It'll be nice to have some young blood in the neighborhood." The Broadus' general contractor arrived one morning and found that a heavy sign he'd hammered into the front yard had been ripped out overnight. 2 weeks after the letter arrived, Maria stopped by the house to look at some paint samples and check the mail. She recognized the thick black lettering on a card-shaped envelope and called the police. "Welcome again to your new home at 657 Boulevard," the Watcher wrote. "The workers have been busy and I have been watching you unload carfuls of your personal belongings. The dumpster is a nice touch. Have they found what is in the walls yet? In time they will." This time, the Watcher had addressed Derek and Maria directly, misspelling their names as Mr. and Mrs. Broadus. Had the Watcher been close enough to hear one of the contractors addressing them? The Watcher appeared to be proud to show that he had been learning a lot about the family in the previous weeks, especially about their children. The letter identified the Broadus 3 kids by birth order and by their nicknames, the ones Maria had been yelling. "I am pleased to know your names now and the name of the young blood you have brought to me," it said. "You certainly say their names often." The letter asked about one child in particular, whom the writer had seen using an easel inside an enclosed porch. "Is she the artist in the family?" The letter continued, 657 Boulevard is anxious for you to move in. It has been years and years since the young blood ruled the hallways of the house. Have you found all of the secrets it holds yet? Will the young blood play in the basement? Or are they too afraid to go down there alone? I would be very afraid if I were them. It is far away from the rest of the house. If you were upstairs, you would never hear them scream. Will they sleep in the attic? Or will you all sleep on the second floor? Who has the bedrooms facing the street? I'll know as soon as you move in. It will help me to know who is in which bedroom. Then I can plan better. All of the windows and doors in 657 Boulevard allow me to watch you and track you as you move through the house. Who am I? I am the Watcher, and have been in control of 657 Boulevard for the better part of 2 decades now. The Woods family turned it over to you. It was their time to move on and kindly sold it when I asked them to. I pass by many times a day. 657 Boulevard is my job, my life, my obsession, and now you are 2 Broadus family. Welcome to the product of your greed. Greed is what brought the past 3 families to 657 Boulevard, and now it has brought you to me. Have a happy moving in day. You know I will be watching. Derek and Maria stopped bringing their kids to the house. They were no longer sure when or if they would move in. Several weeks later, a 3rd letter arrived. "Where have you gone to?" the Watcher wrote. 657 Boulevard is missing you. Built in 1905, 657 Boulevard was perhaps the grandest home on the block, and when the Woods put it on the market, they had received multiple offers above their asking price. This made the Broadus to initially suspect that the Watcher might be someone upset over losing out on the house. But the Woods said one interested buyer had backed out after a bad medical diagnosis, while another had already found a different home. In an email to the Broadus, Andrea Woods proposed another theory. Would the mention of the contractor trucks and your children suggest that it was someone in the neighborhood? A few days after the first letter, Maria and Derek went to a barbecue across the street that was done to welcome them and another new homeowner to the block. The Broadus hadn't told anyone about the Watcher, as the police had instructed, and found themselves watching everything and everyone closely for clues while keeping tabs on their kids, who ran without a care in the world through a crowd that made up much of the suspect pool. "We kept screaming at them to stay close," Maria said. "People must have thought we were crazy." At one point, Derek was chatting with John Schmidt, who lived 2 doors down, when Schmidt told him about the Langfords who lived between them. Peggy Langford was in her 90s, and several of her adult children, all in their 60s, lived with her. The family was a little bit strange, Schmidt said, but harmless. He described one of the younger Langfords, Michael, who didn't work and had a beard like Ernest Hemingway, as kind of a Boo Radley character. Derek thought the case was solved. The Langford house was right next to the easel on the porch. The family had lived there since the 1960s when, according to the letter, the watcher's father had begun observing 657 Boulevard. Richard Langford, the family patriarch, had died 12 years earlier, and the current watcher claimed to have been on the job for the better part of 2 decades. When the Broaddus told Lugo about the family, he said he had already thought about that, and a week after the first letter arrived, he brought Michael Langford to police headquarters for an interview. Michael denied knowing anything about the letters, but the Broaddus say that Lugo told them that the narrative of what he said matched things mentioned in the letters. "This isn't CSI Westfield," Lugo later told the Broaddus. "When the wife is dead, it's the husband." But there wasn't much hard evidence, and after a few weeks, the police chief told the Broaddus that, short of an admission, there wasn't much the department could do. "This is someone who threatened my kids, and the police are saying probably nothing's gonna happen," Derek said. "Probably isn't good enough for me." After the second letter, Derek told the cops that if they didn't take care of the situation, they would have a different kind of case on their hands. "This person attacked my family, and where I'm from, if you do that, you get your ass beat," Derek said. Frustrated, the Broaddus began their own investigation. Derek became especially obsessed. He set up webcams in 657 Boulevard and spent nights crouched in the dark, watching to see if anyone was watching the house at close range. He made a map displaying when each of 657's neighbors had moved in. The Langfords were the only ones there since the 60s, with overlays marking possible sightlines for the easel and a circle for approximate range of earshot to estimate who might have heard Maria yelling their kids' names. Only a few homes fit both criteria. The Broaddus also turned to several experts. They employed a private investigator who staked out the neighborhood and ran background checks on the Langfords but didn't find anything noteworthy. Derek reached out to a former FBI agent who served as the inspiration for Clarice Starling in The Silence of the Lambs. They were on a high school board of trustees together, and they also hired Robert Lenehan, another former FBI agent, to conduct a threat assessment. Lenehan recognized several old-fashioned ticks in the letters that pointed to an older writer. The envelope was addressed to M.M. Broaddus. The salutations included the day's weather: warm and humid, sunny and cool for a summer day, and the sentences had double spaces between them. The letters had a certain literary panache, which suggested a voracious reader, and a surprising lack of profanity given the level of anger, which Lenehan thought meant a less macho writer. Maybe, he wondered, the Watcher had seen The Watcher, starring Keanu Reeves as a serial killer who stalks the detective trying to catch him. Lenehan didn't think The Watcher was likely to act on the threats, but the letters had enough typos and errors to imply a certain erraticism. The first letter was dated Tuesday, June 4th, but that day was a Wednesday. There was also a seething anger directed at the wealthy in particular. The Watcher was upset by new money moving into town. "Are you one of those Hoboken transplants who are ruining Westfield?" And by the Broaddus' relatively modest renovations. "The house is crying from all of the pain it is going through. You have changed it and made it so fancy. You are stealing its history. It cries for the past, and what used to be in the time when I roamed its halls. The 1960s were a good time for 657 Boulevard, when I ran from room to room imagining the life with the rich occupants there. The house was full of life and young blood. Then it got old, and so did my father, but he kept watching until the day he died. And now I watch and wait for the day when the young blood will be mine again." Lenehan recommended looking into former housekeepers or their descendants. Perhaps the Watcher was jealous that the Broaddus had bought a home that the writer couldn't afford. But the focus remained on the Langfords. In cooperation with Westfield police, the Broaddus sent a letter to the Langfords announcing plans to tear down the house, hoping to prompt a response, but nothing happened. Detective Lugo brought Michael Langford in for a second interview but got nowhere, and his sister Abby accused the police of harassing their family. Eventually, the Broaddus hired Lee Levitt, a lawyer who met with several members of the Langford family as well as their attorney to show them the letters, along with photos explaining how their home was one of the few vantage points from which the easel could be seen. The meeting grew tense, Levitt told me, and the Langfords insisted Michael was innocent. One night, Derek had a dream in which he confronted Peggy, the eldest Langford, and demanded she build an 8-foot fence between the properties. Maria was having other kinds of dreams. One night, she woke up to an especially vivid one about a man who lived nearby. He was wearing these boots and carrying a pitchfork and calling to the kids, and I couldn't get to them in time, Maria said. She thought almost anyone could be the watcher, which made daily life feel like navigating a labyrinth of threats. She watched the faces of shoppers at Trader Joe's to see if they looked strangely at her kids and spent hours Googling anyone who seemed suspicious. There were reasons to consider other suspects. For one thing, the police spoke to Michael before the second letter was sent, which would make sending 2 more especially reckless. The Broaddus say that Lugo told them they wouldn't receive any more letters after he spoke to Michael. Then there was the rest of the neighborhood to consider. The private investigator found 2 child sex offenders within a few blocks. Bill Woodward, the Broaddus' house painter, had also noticed something strange. The couple behind 657 Boulevard kept a pair of lawn chairs strangely close to the Broaddus property. One day I was looking out the window and I saw this older guy sitting in one of the chairs, Woodward said. He wasn't facing his house. He was facing the Broaddus. But by the end of 2014, the investigation had stalled. The watcher had left no digital trail, no fingerprints, and no way to place someone at the scene of a crime that could have been hatched from pretty much any mailbox in northern New Jersey. The letters could be read closely for possible clues, or dismissed as the nonsensical ramblings of a sociopath. It was like trying to find a needle in a haystack, said Scott Krause, who helped investigate the case for the Union County Prosecutor's Office. In December, the Westfield police told the Broaddus they had run out of options. Derek showed the letters to his priest, who agreed to bless the house. The renovations to 657 Boulevard, including a new alarm system, were finished within a few months. But the idea of moving in filled the Broaddus with overwhelming anxiety. Could they let their kids play outside or have friends over? Would they get a new letter every week? Derek priced out trained German shepherds and posted a job on a website for military veterans. All you have to do is work out in the backyard every day. But the Broaddus hadn't bought 657 to feel bunkered in a fortress. At the end of the day, it came down to, what are you willing to risk? We weren't going to put our kids in harm's way. Derek had been responding to occasional alarms at the house, sometimes in the middle of the night, bringing a knife with him just in case. They were so joyous about their new home, and then within days they were petrified. Bill Woodward, the painter, said, I'm a stranger and Maria was crying and shaking in my arms. It didn't help that the watcher seemed to be getting more and more unhinged. 657 Boulevard is turning on me. It is coming after me. I don't understand why. What spell did you cast on it? It used to be my friend and now it is my enemy. I am in charge of 657 Boulevard. It is not in charge of me. I will fend off its bad things and wait for it to become good again. It will not punish me. I will rise again. I will be patient and wait for this to pass, and for you to bring the young blood back to me. 657 Boulevard needs young blood. It needs you. Come back. Let the young blood play again like I once did. Let the young blood sleep in 657 Boulevard. Stop changing it and let it alone. 6 months after the letters arrived, the Broaddus decided to sell 657 Boulevard. They initially listed it for more than they paid, to reflect the renovations they'd done. But rumors had already begun to swirl about why they never moved in. One broker emailed to say her client loved it, but that there are so many unsubstantiated rumors flying around that they needed to know more. The watcher was a real-life mystery to solve. A group of Reddit users obsessed over Google Maps Street View, which showed a car parked in front of 657 that one user thought had a man holding a camera in the driver's seat. The range of proposed suspects included a jilted mistress, a spurned realtor, a local high schooler's creative writing project, guerrilla marketing for a horror movie, and mall goths having fun. A commenter on NJ.com suggested ground-penetrating radar to find whatever the watcher claimed was in the walls. In Westfield, people were on edge. At the first Westfield Town Council meeting after the letters became public, Mayor Andy Skibixi assured the public that the watcher hadn't been heard from in a year, and that even though the police hadn't solved the case, their investigation had been exhaustive. Baron Chambliss, a veteran detective in the Westfield Police, was asked to look at the case. "The Broadus are victims, and I don't think they got the support they needed," Chambliss said. He knew his colleagues had looked closely at Michael Langford. According to his brother Sandy Langford, Michael had been diagnosed with schizophrenia as a young man. He sometimes spooked new neighbors when he did strange things, like walk through their backyard or peek into the windows of homes that were being renovated. But those who knew him said that the odd things he did were mostly just unusual neighborly kindness. "He goes out and gets the newspapers for me every morning," said John Schmidt, who lives next door. As Chambliss looked into the case, he discovered something surprising. Investigators had eventually conducted a DNA analysis on one of the envelopes and determined that the DNA belonged to a woman. Chambliss decided to look more closely at Abby Langford, Michael's sister, who worked as a real estate agent. Maybe she upset about missing a commission right next door. She also worked at the local Lord & Taylor, and Chambliss coordinated with a security guard there to nab her plastic water bottle during a shift. After running the tests on the bottle, the DNA came back to not being a match. Not long after, the prosecutor's office gave Derek and Maria some unexpected news. They wouldn't say why or how, but they had ruled out the Langfords as suspects. The Broadus reopened their personal investigation after feeling the police had hit a dead end and would not keep looking. They were still unsure to share too much with their neighbors, who remained in the pool of suspects, but spent an afternoon walking the block with a picture of the watcher's handwritten envelope. They hoped someone might recognize the writing, but the only notable encounter came when an older man who lived behind 657 said his son joked that the watcher sounded a little bit like him. A year after the fact, it was hard to find fresh leads, and the initial police canvass had been so sloppy that it missed a significant clue. Around the same time that the Broadus had received their first letter, another family on the boulevard got a similar note from the watcher. The parents of that family had lived in their house for years, and their kids were grown, so they threw the letter away just as the Woods did. There wasn't a whole lot to go on. One night, Chambliss and a partner were sitting in the back of a van parked on Boulevard, watching the house through a pair of binoculars. Around 11 p.m., a car stopped in front of the house for a while, which made Chambliss suspicious. He says the car belonged to a young woman in a nearby town whose boyfriend lived on the same block as 657. The woman told Chambliss her boyfriend was into some really dark video games, including one in which he was playing as a specific character, the Watcher. As for the female DNA, Chambliss figured the girlfriend or someone else could have helped. The boyfriend was living elsewhere at the time, but he agreed to come in for an interview on 2 separate occasions. He didn't show up either time. Chambliss didn't have enough evidence to compel him to appear, and with the media attention dying down, he dropped the case and moved on. While the Broadus continued to be consumed by stress and fear for the rest of Westfield, the story became little more than a creepy urban legend, a house to walk by on Halloween if you were brave enough. No one who had lived in the house before the Woods could recall anything unusual, and it was hard for people to imagine that their idyllic neighborhood could be host to something so sinister. The Broadus were suddenly outcasts not only from their home, but also their town. Derek wanted to leave Westfield. In 2016, the Broadus got some good news. A family with grown children and 2 big dogs had agreed to rent 657 Boulevard. The renter told the Star-Ledger he wasn't worried about the Watcher, though he had a clause in the lease that let him out in case of another letter. 2 weeks later, Derek went to 657 to deal with squirrels that had taken up residence in the roof. The renter handed him an envelope that had just arrived. Violent winds and bitter cold, to the vile and spiteful Derek and his wench of a wife, Maria. This letter, 2.5 years after the Watcher appeared, came out of nowhere. It was dated February 13th, the day the Broadus gave depositions in their lawsuit against the Woods. "You wonder who the Watcher is? Turn around idiots," the letter read. "Maybe you even spoke to me. one of the so-called neighbors who has no idea who the watcher could be. Or maybe you do know and are too scared to tell anyone. Good move. The letter was less stylish and more wrathful than the others, and it seemed the writer had been closely following the story. They had seen the media coverage. I walked by the news trucks when they took over my neighborhood and mocked me. Derek's surreptitious investigatory efforts. I watched as you watched from the dark house in an attempt to find me. Telescopes and binoculars are wonderful inventions, and the attempt to tear down the house. 657 Boulevard survived your attempted assault and stood strong with its army of supporters barricading its gates, the letter read. My soldiers of the Boulevard followed my orders to a T. They carried out their mission and saved the soul of 657 Boulevard with my orders. All hail the Watcher. The renter was mentioned. He was spooked, but agreed to stay if the Broaddus installed cameras around the house, and the letter indicated revenge could come in many forms. Maybe a car accident, maybe a fire, maybe something as simple as a mild illness that never seems to go away but makes you feel sick day after day after day after day after day. Maybe the mysterious death of a pet. Loved ones suddenly die, planes and cars and bicycles crash, bones break. The Broaddus no longer live in fear of the Watcher, but they continue to deal with lingering effects from the letters. They have a new tenant at 657, but the rent doesn't cover the mortgage. Their kids are occasionally teased at school. And the conspiratorial rumors persist. The Watcher was also no longer the only person sending anonymous letters in Westfield. Several families received an envelope in their mailboxes. They'd been delivered by hand to the homes of people who had been the most vocal in criticizing the Broaddus online. The letter writer had clearly been infected not only with the Watcher's penchant for anonymous notes, but also a simmering resentment. One that had snaked its way through Westfield, making enemies of neighbors. As we come to the end of the chilling tale of the Watcher house in Westfield, New Jersey. From the mysterious letters to the unsettling atmosphere, this story raises so many questions. What do you think? Is the Watcher just a harmless prankster, or is there something more ominous lurking in the shadows? I'd love to hear your opinions. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think the Broaddus should have moved in, or would you run for the hills? If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of New Jersey's most intriguing mysteries, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more captivating stories. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.